She tried to party in revealing dress, but I stopped her. She called me controlling, so I divorced her. Who would have believed that a dress can bring an end to a marriage? Here I stand with the remains of my life. It wasn't only the dress, though. It was everything that came with it. The arguments, the accusations, the choices whether I thought of the consequences or not. Hi, my name is Anna. Well, I was married for 4 years to a man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. He was my rock, my stability, but somewhere along the way, I messed it all up. This isn't some sob story to gain sympathy. I'm here to share how one reckless night spiraled into something I never saw coming. Maybe someone out there can learn from my mistakes, even if it's too late for me.
Nevin.
He came to the wedding where I was the bridesmaid for our friend. I recall pegging myself against the bar, somewhat awkwardly because I did not recognize many of the attendees. Then there he was, relaxed, sweet-talking, and completely comfortable in a room full of strangers. He had this aura of protection over himself, the kind that when you are near them, you feel secure without thinking about it. We ended up joking with one another, swapping stories, and trying to snatch another piece of the wedding cake. We were just comfortable and made it seem like we've known each other for ages. Things moved fast after that. We started dating exclusively within weeks, and honestly, it felt like something out of a dream. He was so driven, the kind of guy who set goals and actually followed through with them. He had this presence about him, people respected him, without him needing to say much. He wasn't loud or flashy, but you always knew he was in control. And I won't lie, I loved that about him. It made me feel secure, like no matter what, he'd always have my back. Even though I was impressed with his muscles, sometimes it was too much to handle for my own taste. He was rather authoritative in his stand about the right and wrong things and was never afraid to show it. It began right down to the accessories on my body, how I spent my time or who I socialized with. I guess I would respond to it in a casual manner like, "Oh, I am going out with some friends I met in college," and he would ask questions, not aggressively, but I would still be left wondering whether he really trusted me or not. The first real tension came when we started talking about personal boundaries. He believed in a more traditional approach to relationships. Partners should be each other's number one priority, and certain behaviors just didn't fit into that. Things like partying late, hanging out with people who didn't respect our relationship, or even my choice of clothes sometimes became topics of discussion. I understood where he was coming from. He wanted to protect what we had, but at times it felt like I was losing pieces of myself to keep him comfortable. At first, those differences were not very worrisome. I cared for him, and I felt that we should try and work it out. He was very specific with what he wanted, and I felt like I could handle it. He wasn't abusive or even punishing, but he had this method of domination that put his way beyond everyone else's. And for a while, I went along with it. To ensure I avoided such temptations, I stopped wearing some clothes, missing some functions, and generally designed my life for the life we created together. But over time, I started to feel a small, growing frustration. I missed the version of me that didn't overthink every decision. I'd look at my old pictures or remember the fun nights out with friends and wonder if I was being fair to myself. He never forced me to change, but his expectations felt like an unspoken rulebook I couldn't ignore. Looking back at that time, a part of me enjoyed how he guided me, something that I was lacking in my life. He was reliable and punctual, maybe the type of man that everyone wants to have around during crucial moments. My family adored him. My friends even began teasing me as to how lucky I am to have a partner of such nature. As time passed, I slowly began to walk on eggshells, not out of his request, but because I did not want to face the conversations that followed, making me feel guilty for even existing as myself. Looking back now, I can see how those little cracks in our relationship started forming early on. It wasn't one big argument or some dramatic event. It was a slow drift. We loved each other, but our values on freedom and boundaries were like oil and water. At the time, I told myself love was enough to fix it. I thought we'd figure out a middle ground eventually. But life doesn't always work like that, and those differences have a way of catching up to you, no matter how much you try to ignore them. It began innocently, so subtly hard that it seemed like it was beginning at the base. Sometimes I dressed up for a night out with friends, wore something that I felt comfortable in, and he'd stare at me like this. It wasn't an unapproving glare, but the crease of his forehead, as if he were attempting to calculate whether or not my attire was right. I recall one evening I had dinner with some friends wearing my sleeveless dress. As we left, he pulled me aside and said, "Are you sure that is reasonable to wear?" Still joking, I laughed at it, but seeing his serious face, I understood that he wasn't joking. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself he was just being protective, that he cared about me and didn't want anyone to get the wrong idea about us as a couple. And honestly, I kind of liked that he noticed. It felt like he was paying attention in a way most guys don't. But over time, those comments started to pile up. It wasn't every day or even every week, but enough that I started second-guessing my choices before he even said anything. The thing is, I completely enjoyed dressing up. I always have. Sometimes getting dressed up, fixing your hair and makeup, and feeling good in your own skin is worth it because you look fierce. As far as him, there was a line that I failed to understand even where it began or where it ended. He would compliment me, then remind me of my status in marriage by saying things like, "You are a married woman," or "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," in relation to my dressing code. Then there were my friends. I've always been close to a group of girls who, let's just say, know how to have a good time. We've been through everything together in college, bad breakups, late-night adventures, and they're like family to me. But he wasn't a fan. He'd make comments like, "Do you really think they have your best interests at heart?" Or, "They're not exactly role models for a stable marriage." Again, I let it slide at first. He wasn't outright banning me from seeing them, but I could tell he didn't approve. It triggered the feeling of living in two different realities. There was the version of me with him, the good wife who wore all her clothes hidden beneath and who refused nights outs and bothered to construct a home. There was the other me who longed to have the ability to be silly and laugh loud, or wear something provocative or dance irreverently. In my desire to try and accept his sentiments, I felt the same way too, honestly. But the more I attempted to meet his expectations of a wife, the more I felt like lose myself. I think the moment I realized things were really changing was when I stopped looking forward to getting dressed up. I used to love picking out outfits and planning evenings with my friends, but now it feels like a chore. I'd stand in front of my closet and think, is this going to start an argument? I started choosing clothes based on what would cause the least friction instead of what made me feel good. The worst part was that he was not even overtly dominating. It was not perverted. He threw no temper tantrums or insisted I be something that I wasn't. Instead, he would answer it all in this specific, steady voice, making me feel like I am the one in the wrong for daring to argue here. For example, he will remark such as, "I am just saving you behind," or "People should not disrespect you because of how you dress or behave." It had always been hard for me to accept, but seeing as he had a point, I had no choice but to accept it. The tension wasn't just about clothes or friends, it was about freedom. I started feeling like I was walking on a tightrope, trying to balance who I was with who he wanted me to be. And the more I tried to keep that balance, the more I felt like I was going to fall. I'd catch myself daydreaming about simpler times before every decision felt like it came with a price. One particularly memorable night is worth describing. It was time for dinner with his colleagues, so I wore a black dress knowing fully well that it suited him, and I found it very classy. Indeed, it was not very provocative, just a little tight-fitting dress with a side opening. As I entered the room, he looked at his phone, then at me, and said, "Is that the best you can do for tonight?" I wanted to protest, to stand my ground and tell him he's being unfair, but all that came out was something about going to change and then going back to the wardrobe. I wore a plain blouse and skirt in a color which I believed made me blend with other people. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, I couldn't stop thinking about how I'd let myself give in again. It wasn't just the dress, it was the principle. I wanted to respect him, but I also wanted to feel like I still had a say in my own life. The tension between us was building, slowly but surely, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. To be precise, it was the message someone typed in the chat, that their college friend was having a reunion party. It was strange thinking about catching up with most of these people, because I had not seen them for years. I was thrilled, actually, maybe too thrilled to even consider the implications of the new developments to my home front. The night of the party, I decided to go all out. I dug through my closet and found a dress I'd been saving, something bold, sleek, and a little risky. It was a deep red, with a fitted bodice and a slit up the side. It wasn't anything outrageous, at least not in my eyes, but it was definitely outside the realm of what I normally wore. I hadn't worn anything like it in years, and as soon as I slipped it on, I felt a spark of the old me. But then I walked out of the bedroom and the situation was different altogether. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, when he glanced up and saw me. For a second, he didn't say anything. His eyes scanned me from head to toe, and I could feel the judgment radiating off him. Then he said, "Are you seriously planning to wear that tonight?" I attempted to ignore it, wearing a nonchalant expression and waving my hand dismissively at him. "Yeah, why not? It is just a party coming together with friends." His phone was already on the table, and he was standing up, closing the gap between us in a few deliberate steps. "You know exactly why not," he said. "That dress it's not appropriate, and you know it." I felt a constriction in my chest, but this time I wasn't going to fold. "It's just a dress. You've never seen a naked man?" I retorted, although my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. He shook his head, the tension in his jaw unmistakable. "This isn't about the dress, and you know it. It's about respect for yourself and for this marriage." The word that changed me was respect. Respect? In what way is the way I am dressed provocative, or how is what I'm wearing bad? I'm not doing anything wrong. I just want that one night when I don't have to tell myself to stop, when I can just be happy with myself. His eyes narrowed, and for a second I thought he was going to start yelling. But instead he took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and said something that chilled me to my core. "Do whatever you want, but remember, actions have consequences." These words fell like a threat to my ears, and for a second I was close to surrendering. But I reminded myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong the whole time. This was just him being controlling again, trying to make me feel as though I was nothing out of this world. "I'm going to the party," I said, quickly packing for the weekend, locking the door behind me. I could feel his eyes on me the entire time, but I didn't look back. The slam of the door behind me was louder than I expected, and as I walked to my car, I tried to shake off the weight of his words. The journey to the party was longer than it was supposed to be. His voice kept menacing me when I tried to forget what he said during the last moments before he left me alone. But at some point, I was forced to park the car and get out, so at this time, I had made up my mind to have some fun. When I walked into the venue, it was like stepping into another world. The music was loud, the lights were dim, and the air buzzed with energy. People were laughing, hugging, and catching up like no time had passed. It felt good to be back in that environment, to be surrounded by people who knew a version of me that didn't have to second-guess every choice. The dress was most definitely eye-catching, there one cannot argue. People at the party were coming up to me to either comment on how I hadn't changed at all, or to say hi. At that moment, it seemed like I had no responsibilities, like an early college student who was relieved of all campus obligations. But then the drinks started flowing, and things got a little blurry. I wasn't planning to drink much, but the shots kept coming, and I didn't want to seem like the buzzkill. One drink turned into 3, and before I knew it, I was dancing. All of these graduated from waving their hands in the air, feeling dizzy, laughing, and exchanging old funny stories. But then somebody whom I had met only briefly in college decided to become my friend. He was an overconfident guy, and evidently such a type of man is inherently capable of attracting people towards themselves. No, we were all just having fun, or at least that's what I told myself. But at some point the lines blurred. He grabbed my hand to spin me around, and I laughed, maybe a little too loudly. His hand lingered on my waist for a second too long, but I didn't move away. It didn't feel serious. It was just dancing, right? But then came the change in the rhythm of the music, and sliding into a much more sedate one, I could almost feel his breath against my face, where it shouldn't have been. I had to move aside and bend a little to adjust my shoe, and I knew all eyes were on me. It wasn't until someone pulled out their phone and started recording that I realized how this might look. I suddenly felt exposed, like every move I made was being documented and judged. The party lasted only minutes, However, my feelings were no longer the same. I wasn't carefree anymore. I was waiting for him to call or text me, but there was nothing at all. Perhaps reflecting on this and that, when I decided to check out social media, I was made fully aware of what had just occurred. There it was, a video of me, spinning and laughing, his hand too close, my smile too wide. The comments started pouring in, most of them harmless, but a few made my stomach drop. People noticed. People saw. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, looking at the ceiling above me, going over everything in my mind. I attempted to convince myself that it was nothing, that I didn't do something wrong. But somewhere inside of me, I think I realized that he wouldn't view it that way. And honestly, I wasn't even sure if I did that. The party started out just like I imagined, a mix of nostalgia and excitement. Old friends, familiar faces, and that warm buzz of being around people who knew you from a different time. It was harmless at first. Drinks were poured, jokes were shared, and the conversations flowed effortlessly. It felt good to laugh without overthinking, to reconnect with people who remembered the version of me that felt carefree. But as the night wore on, things started to shift. I wasn't keeping track of how many drinks I'd had, and the music got louder, the laughter more uninhibited. Someone suggested shots, and before I knew it, we were toasting to memories and downing drinks like we were still in college. I told myself it was all in good fun, just a chance to let loose after months of feeling restrained. Then came the dancing. It started as a group, nothing out of the ordinary. We were just moving to the beat, letting the music take over. But then a guy I vaguely remembered from college joined in. He was one of those people who always knew how to grab attention, the life of the party type. He pulled me into a spin, and everyone cheered. It was playful, lighthearted, or at least that's how it started. But as the night went on, the line between innocent fun and something else began to blur. He stepped closer, his hand resting on my waist just a little too long. I laughed it off, telling myself it was nothing, but there was a voice in the back of my head warning me to be careful. Still, the music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and I was caught up in the moment. At some point, someone pulled out their phone. I didn't even notice at first, but then they started recording, and I felt a flicker of unease. I knew how things could be twisted when captured out of context. I tried to step away, creating space between us, but the damage was already done. The rest of the night was a blur. I remember more drinks, more dancing, and that guy showing up again to make another playful grab at my hand. It didn't feel like a big deal at the time, just a drunk partygoer being a little too friendly. But as the night wound down and people started leaving, I began to feel the weight of everything. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a heavy feeling in my chest. I grabbed my phone to check the time, and there it was, dozens of notifications lighting up my screen. My stomach dropped as I opened social media and saw the videos. There I was, front and center, laughing and dancing, that guy's hand on my waist, my laughter too loud, my smile too wide. The comments were already pouring in, some playful, others not so much. Looks like someone's having fun. Isn't she married? Those words felt like a punch to the gut. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to piece together the night before. Had I crossed a line? Did I let things go too far? I told myself it was all harmless, that I hadn't done anything intentionally wrong. But the more I watched the videos, the harder it was to convince myself. I knew I had to go home and face him, but I wasn't ready for what was waiting. When I walked through the door, the silence hit me like a brick wall. He was sitting on the couch, his phone in his hand, staring at the screen with an expression I couldn't read. He didn't say anything right away, and that was worse than if he'd started yelling. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words felt stuck in my throat. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes cold and sharp. "I saw the videos," he said, his voice low and measured. My heart sank. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he cut me off. "Do you even understand how disrespectful that was? To me? To us?" His words felt like daggers, each one hitting deeper than the last. I tried to tell him it wasn't what it looked like, that nothing happened, but he wasn't buying it. "It's not about what happened," he said, his voice rising just slightly. "It's about the fact that you didn't think about how your actions would reflect on our marriage. You didn't care how it would make me feel." The guilt was overwhelming. but so was the frustration. I wanted to defend myself, to say that I was just trying to have a little fun, that I hadn't meant for any of this to happen. But deep down, I knew he was right. I hadn't thought about the consequences, and now I was paying the price. The rest of the day passed in a haze. He didn't yell or demand answers. He just shut down completely. The silence between us was suffocating, and no matter how hard I tried to break through it, he wouldn't let me in. By the time I went to bed that night, I knew things would never be the same. I lay awake, replaying the night over and over in my head, wondering where it all went wrong. I thought about the videos, the looks from my friends, his words cutting through me like a knife. And for the first time, I started to realize just how much damage had been done. When I walked into the house, I could feel it immediately. The air was heavy, thick with unspoken words. He was sitting in the living room, his phone in one hand and a glass of water in the other. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't say anything right away. That silence was louder than anything he could have shouted at me. I set my bag down slowly, trying to read his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something else entirely, like he was just done. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he looked up at me and set the phone on the coffee table. "Do you have anything to say?" My heart was racing, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "It's not what it looks like," I started, my words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't do anything wrong. It was just a party. People were drinking, dancing." He cut me off, his voice calm but firm. "And you didn't think, not for a second, about how it would look? About what it would say about you? About us?" I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He leaned back in his seat, shaking his head slowly. "I've always respected you. Always. Even when I didn't agree with you, I respected you. But clearly, you don't respect me or what we built together." And those words hit harder than anything else he could have said. I felt my chest tighten, my throat dry. "That's not true," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I do respect you. I respect us." He scoffed, a sound I'd never heard from him before. "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were more concerned about how you looked to a bunch of strangers than about how your actions would affect your husband." I tried again to explain, to downplay it. "It was just one night. I didn't do anything wrong. Those videos—" "Don't," he said sharply, cutting me off again. "Don't try to make this about the videos. It's not about them. It's about you, your choices, your priorities." I could feel the tears welling up, but I forced them back. Crying wouldn't fix this. "I made a mistake," I admitted. "I got caught up in the moment, but it doesn't mean I don't care about you or our marriage." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for something on the tablet, a small stack of papers. He held them out to me, his expression unreadable. "You care so much about this marriage? Then explain to me why I should stay in it." I hesitated, not understanding at first. Then I saw what he was holding. Divorce papers. My hands started to shake as I took them from him. "You already had these drawn up?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I didn't need to," he said quietly. "I printed them this morning. It's a standard template. All I needed to do was fill in the blanks." The weight of what was happening finally hit me. "You're really going to throw everything away over this?" I asked, my voice breaking. He stood up, his posture calm but resolute. "I didn't throw anything away. You did." He paused for a moment, his gaze softening just slightly. "I loved you. I still do, in a way. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep fighting for something when I'm the only one trying to protect it." I wanted to argue, to plead with him, but the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, clutching the papers, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The next morning, he was gone. He'd packed an overnight bag and left a note on the counter. "Take your time to figure things out," it said, "but I've already made up my mind." I thought he'd cool off. I thought he'd come back and we'd talk it out, like we always did after a fight. But days turned into weeks, and the silence between us only grew. The divorce was finalized faster than I expected. He didn't drag it out, didn't fight over assets or try to punish me. It was clean, almost clinical, like he just wanted to close that chapter of his life and move on. I stayed in the house for a while, surrounded by the echoes of what used to be. Every room reminded me of him, of us, the nights we'd spent talking on the couch, the dinners we cooked together, the plans we made for the future. All of it felt like a ghost haunting me. Friends tried to reach out, offering support or a shoulder to cry on, but I couldn't face them. I couldn't face anyone. The guilt was unbearable, but so was the anger at him, at myself, at the situation. I wanted to blame him for giving up so easily, but deep down, I knew he was right. I had disrespected him, disrespected our marriage, and now I was paying the price. Every day felt like a battle to keep going. I'd wake up and stare at the empty side of the bed, wondering how things had spiraled so far out of control. I'd replay our last conversation over and over, wishing I could go back and change the choices I'd made, but it was too late. He moved on, and I was left picking up the pieces of a life I'd taken for granted. And the worst part? I knew I only had myself to blame. Update. It's been months now, and not a single day goes by where I don't think about what I could have done differently. The regret sits in my chest like a weight that doesn't go away, no matter how much I try to move on. I've replayed that night in my head 1,000 times, trying to figure out where I lost myself, where I stopped thinking about us, and started acting like I was still that carefree version of me from years ago. But regret doesn't change reality. It doesn't undo the hurt I caused or the trust I shattered. I've come to accept that. There's no going back to fix what I broke, no magic word or gesture that can erase the choices I made. He's gone and he's not coming back. And honestly, I don't blame him. I'm not here to paint myself as the victim or to ask for sympathy. I made my bed and now I'm lying in it. I know a lot of people watching this might think I deserved everything that happened, and maybe I did. But it doesn't make it any less painful to lose someone you thought you'd have forever with. The thing is, I thought I was fighting for my freedom, for a chance to hold on to a piece of myself that I felt was slipping away. But in trying to prove a point, I ended up losing the person who mattered most to me. And now I'm left wondering if that version of me I was trying so hard to hold on to was worth it. To anyone listening, if there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. You can say sorry 1,000,000 times, but the damage is done. People can forgive, but they don't forget. And sometimes, forgiveness doesn't mean they'll stay. I don't know where to go from here. My life feels like a blank slate, and not in a good way. It's not freedom, it's emptiness. I had everything I thought I wanted, and I threw it away because I didn't stop to think about how my actions would affect someone else. I hope that sharing my story can at least serve as a cautionary tale for someone out there. If you're in a relationship, cherish it. Don't take it for granted. Because once it's gone, you can't get it back, no matter how much you wish you could. So this is it. This is my truth. Messy and painful as it is. I loved him and I still do. But love isn't enough without trust, and I broke that. That's on me. All I can do now is move forward, even if I have no idea where that path will lead.